What are the actual advantages to shallowing the golf club? And what does shallowing even mean? We talk a lot about shallowing the golf club, but we never really talk about the benefits of it. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but we first need to understand what it is. So we have this thing called attack angle when we hit a ball, right? And so the club can move very sharply down into the ball, or it can move a little bit shallower, or think about an airplane like landing on a runway. It can come in much smoother and lower and kind of shallower into the ball. That's not actually what we're talking about when we talk about shallowing the golf club. We're actually talking more so about the pitch of the shaft in the downswing. And so what I'm referring to there is the more I pull this club head back behind me and the club gets more horizontal, people call that a more shallow position. If I push the club head more in front of me and the club gets more vertical, well, that's called a more steep position. But what's more important, in my opinion, than the pitch of the shaft is actually where the club head itself is located. So we know as coaches, right, that most people struggle with an outside-in swing path. Not everyone, but a majority of golfers that struggle, they have a path that works a little bit too far outside in. So at its core, shallowing the club or pushing the club head further behind the player in the downswing, that essentially aims the swing direction in the club path to be slightly more from the inside, hence negating some of the fade bias or the slice bias the player might fight with their outside-in path. So that's kind of benefit number one, is it helps kind of get the path working a little bit more from the inside. But obviously that can be too much too. We can have this club too far underneath the plane and swing too far out to the right and hit big hooks and blocks, right? So there's kind of this balance here. Now we always talk about how rotated a player is as well, and everybody wants to get to impact and have all this shaft lean and have two cheeks to the camera and have their chest be open and all these great things we see tour players do. Well, what people don't understand is rotation on the downswing or getting more open, that is something that steepens every single part of the swing. So if I just took my hands right here and I rotated 10 more degrees, all of a sudden my club went from a more shallow position to a more steep position. And so in a vacuum, if I took just that one change and I made my golf swing and I had 10 more degrees of rotation, I'm going to be very steep on the ball. I'm going to fight big pulls and big wipe cuts, right? So shallowing is actually something we can match up with rotation, because shallowing is something that shifts the path from the inside, and rotation is something that shifts the path from outside in. And so now you can kind of take the benefits of both and blend them together. You're able to swing pretty straight into the ball if you shallow the club and rotate really well. There's a lot of benefits to that. The more open a player typically gets, the less club face rotation you tend to see sometimes, right? The other benefit to it is a lot of people will actually early extend or move their pelvis in an attempt to late shallow the club. So there's a difference between shallowing the club early in the swing and late in the swing. If you're someone who shallows the club early in the swing, it means that at this point here, the swing direction is programmed to be very straight. From here, all you simply need to do is, like we said, rotate and stay in posture. Well, if you're someone who starts the transition in a steeper position where the club head itself is more in front of you, and you stay in posture and rotate, you are going to jam this club in the ground and you're going to have a path that's way outside in. So what I'll see a lot of players do if they get steep with the club or push this in front of them in transition is they will actually late in the downswing push the pelvis in, get the chest to come out, and what that does is it actually shallows the club and it gets the player further from the ground so that they don't jam it into the ground. And so if I use this stick here to represent my spine angle, and I use this club to represent kind of the relationship between the two. If I simply came down steep and then pushed my pelvis in, you can see how that club wants to pull a little bit more behind me. So the club head itself is shallowing, but obviously I'm moving my hips in, my chest is coming up out of the shot. I'm going to face some face control issues and some strike issues as well. So that's one thing that shallowing kind of allows us the opportunity to do. If we can shallow the club early in transition, we now have incentive to keep our pelvis back, keep our chest down and in the shot, and rotate. Now, if you don't do that, if you shallow the club nicely in transition and you do kick your pelvis in, this is where we'll start to see the path get way too far from the inside and the player struggles with blocks and hooks. Now, the last kind of benefit here is a little bit tricky, okay? The height of the handle at impact plays a very large role in how much face control a player can have, okay? So let's say I'm that player that's a little bit steep in transition and I early extend. Well, I've never seen anyone come through and hit their leg. So what you're actually going to see players do is they're going to push their hands out, forearm roll to the right late, and they end up with this handle that's very, very vertical at impact. And so when the handle is super vertical at impact, any twist to the grip points the club face more offline. Now, if I did the extreme, if I really shallowed the club and really kept my pelvis back, now if I got the club like insanely toe up and low handle here, the same amount of twisting actually doesn't point the club face offline as much. And so there's a benefit here to having the handle return around the same plane, but not excessively higher than it started at impact. Remember, when the club is pointed a little bit more toed down, or think about the ball being below your feet, where does the ball typically go for a right-handed golfer? Typically wants to go to the right. Well, that's because of how the face sits with the lie angle, right? So as I raise this handle, the face points to the right. More closing is going to be required to get that ball online. So those are some of the benefits to shallowing. Thanks for watching the video. Online coaching is available as always.